Hello everyone, welcome. Welcome to this session on interoperability. My name is Eirik Arnesen. I'm a physician working with e-health at the Norwegian Medical Association in Norway. We have a very interesting session today. It's going to last for 75 minutes, so that means to 4 o'clock. So I'll give all the speakers a few minutes after their presentation to answer questions. So please prepare some questions, everyone. In this session, we have the three big EHR vendors represented. They are going to share their vision on how they will make their systems more open and flexible for integration with other systems from other vendors. And this is really good news, I think. We have maybe all experienced how difficult integrations and connectivity between systems can be. So the first one out is Tomas Nordheim Alme from DIPS. Tomas is a physician. He studied almost the same time as myself in Oslo. He has been working as Chief Medical Officer in DIPS for more than 5 years. He told me that the success of real-time clinical decision support depends heavily on interoperability between clinical information systems. And while most vendors can demonstrate clinical decision support within data silos, real-time clinical decision support across data sources is hard to implement. And Tomas has a solution for this, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Eirik. And let's start with the disappointments then, because I'm going to discuss it briefly, but inspired by recent events, where I see that we still have some work to do when it comes to communicating in a way where we understand each other on the terms we use in interoperability. I'm going to use a little bit more time on some very sort of basic terms that we have to agree on in interoperability, and then perhaps point forwards. So it's going to be more on open platforms than on decision support. I hope you're okay with that. This one needs some... how many non-Scandinavians are here? You, of course. There's one. Okay, so I'll explain it in English for your benefit then. EHiN is one of the big culture figures in Scandinavian culture. He is a mathematician, was a mathematician and an inventor. And when war came to Denmark, he, after considering his options, joined the Danish resistance. And he was actually a leading figure there. And what he did, amongst other things, was to write poems. And many of those poems became important. I mean, they were sort of being tagged on walls around. So he has another one which is more even better in that respect. But this one, for some mysterious reason that I don't know, it started showing up on Facebook on Wednesday. I don't know why. I was sort of thinking, probably has something to do with interoperability, or not. So I'll try to translate it for you, because that's sort of where we are also in interoperability. It's not just that it's technical difficult, but we don't speak about the same stuff and we don't understand the same stuff when we speak. So anyway, this poem is called The World's Greatest, and it says like this: to appeal to reason is the world's greatest punch in the air. You get it? You're laughing. And sometimes it feels like that, because sometimes when you think you are doing exactly the right thing, you know, everyone should sort of fall in on this. People don't. And people come with other ideas, and you sort of discuss, but aren't we discussing the same stuff? And sometimes we think we are discussing the same stuff because we're using the same term, but then we perhaps understand them differently. The basic trouble that we have today is that we, over years, have made systems that consist of an enormous amount of silos. In Oslo University Hospital today, For instance, there are 800 silos. And interoperability strategy is to try to figure out how we can connect at least some information between all of them. And none of these systems were meant to be integrated to others. I mean, they're not designed specifically for that purpose. They're designed to solve a problem, but at the time when they were designed, the only way to design them are sort of full stack design. And so, I mean, our system is like that, other systems are like that, and that's where we are. So, this creates an enormous cost, and it creates a difficulty in moving in this with the speed that we would want to move, because we are using resources first to create silo systems from bottom up. So vendors use a lot of energy on creating something that the other silo also have, just in a slightly different way. And then we create we use an enormous amount of resources to try to get these systems to talk together at a very rudimentary scale. This is an example, and this is beautiful engineering. It's fantastic handwork. This is how systems can talk to each other. Our system is that little round thing over there. And it's nothing to say about the handwork that goes down to doing this, but it follows from this that it takes a lot of time, it costs a lot of money, and it makes the whole structure quite rigid, because if you want to make changes to these things, there's a lot of consequence that you will have to handle. And I often get this association. I used to live in India, and this is a typical New Delhi light post. It works. Everyone has power, but please don't touch. And that makes innovation pretty hard. So before I started working for DIPS, I worked for a small startup company. So I think I speak to startup companies all the time. The thing with a startup company in eHealth is that you spend a little bit of your capital on creating a product that is actually quite good, and then the rest of it is burned while you wait to be implemented in a hospital, because you are in line behind someone else trying to get into that bundle. It's not a critique, it's a factual thing that this is the way things are, and we should try, at least in the future when we design systems, to design them in a way where we don't end up like this. Sometimes you get the feeling that, probably you've seen, you also have the situation at home. Sometimes when you have a rational discussion and you agree and you go back and you do to completely different thing. And what didn't we agree on? We understand things differently. And one cruel example of that, this is a report made by the Health Directorate in Norway a few years ago, sort of the state of ICT in health in Norway. And they say National ICT, which is the strategic ICT organization of the regional health trusts, had chosen archetypes as a method for structuring EHR data. It's unclear whether other options have been considered, for example, SNOMED CT in combination with ICD-10 as used in many of the leading systems internationally. And I said, what? And it's okay to don't understand what's wrong in that sentence if you're not taking any strategic, if you're not working, if you're not a developer. Because if you're a developer and you don't realize this is wrong, then you probably skipped some classes in school. If you take strategic decisions and you don't understand the difference, then you're going to make some very terrible, expensive mistakes. I'm being sort of blunt here, but I figured out recently that for years we've been discussing having different opinions on what these terms really mean. And we have to, one way or the other, we have to agree on one way of seeing it. So let me basically say that the terminology is a formalization of what we know about, for instance, about the health domain. Terminology is also the term ontology, you will know, is the way we can know that the finger is part of the arm for everyone who has a body and is a human. That's a terminology. That's an ontology. An information model, that is how I create some information in the system around the patient, so that I can use the terminology to say that the finger of the patient is broken. And by using the terminology, I can also figure out that when the finger is broken, probably this has something to do with the arm, if that is meaningful to me. But it's nothing to do with the information model. So, the health directorate said that they critiqued national ICT for working with an vendor-neutral set of information models, which is a fantastic idea. I mean, it's an excellent idea. If we could have vendor-neutral information models outside systems, imagine how much easier it would be to have systems talking to each other. By saying that there are terminologies that have a different name. Did you get this? I illustrated it. This is an archetype. Doesn't matter. It's just a way of describing an information model. This is how a system could store a diagnosis of a patient or a problem of a patient. In the Open EHR standard, we say that these information models should be common, they should be open source, and vendors should be able to import them into their systems so that we have the same information models. Then we can use terminologies to put the problem into the archetype, right? That's where ICD come in, or that's where SNOMED comes in, right? So the information model is a place to store the information. And if not open source, open information model, then it will be something that someone came up with at home or in their garage or wherever they come up with it. That's the alternative. SNOMED is not an alternative to OpenEHR. Those two fit like fingers in a glove. And the same with ICD-10. So, okay, now that misunderstanding is cleared. I'm glad we had this conversation. And then someone will maybe say that, but FHIR, for sure, that's an alternative. That solves everything. And I don't know if you know the history of FHIR. FHIR is fantastic. FHIR is 4. Before FHIR, we had this fantastic branding also. Before FHIR, we had HL7 version 3, and before that, we had HL7 version 2. I'm sure there was a version 1 also, but I don't remember it. But all of those are the same thing. There's no difference in them from interoperability, semantic interoperability point of view. They are very different technically. And when it comes to FHIR, developers love it because it's good to work with. But what an integration standard is that that's the minimum data set that we can agree on between systems that have invented their own information models to begin with. So vendor A says, you know, I'm going to define diagnosis in this way. This is the metadata I'm going to put. And then system B says, no, I'm going to define it this way. And it's actually part of the business models because it's almost like owning a money printer when you have your own information model and you sell integration components. So what you really do is that with FHIR, you translate the minimum data set that you were able to agree on between the sets. And that's fantastic if you have already made your system and there's no going back. But it's sort of foolish or idiotic if you are creating a system from scratch. You have every option in the world and you choose to say, I'm going to define my own information model. I'm not going to use anything that looks that is standardized. Are you getting my drift there? I'm glad we had this because we can't really talk about decision support between systems unless we use the same. This is just an illustration. This is integration standard. So this could be FHIR. I have one type of socket in the house, and I have one on my computer, and I need something in between so that they speak together. It's fantastic. I have one of these. This is actually mine. I have it in my bag. I bring it everywhere I go. But if I can choose, if I'm building my house, I would sort of put the sockets that goes with my equipment, obviously, instead of having all of these, right? Making sense? This is open standard. Otherwise, we end up like this. So, this is the standard picture which I always use. While sometimes I say that, or always I say that sometimes it feels like working in health ICT is like running in porridge. And running in porridge, if you've tried it, it's a frustrating thing because it's very hard to get traction in porridge. And the thing is, there are some things that make this hard, and there are some things that makes it slow, even where we are now. Imagine where we are going with, for instance, decision support between systems on data that we today are not even able to store in a meaningful way in our systems. Then think about the complexity and the tangle of wires that we're going to have, and the users. Because the users aren't happy with our speed. We are putting more and more manpower on stuff, and still it feels like things are going just slower and slower. So we need sort of a new strategy. That's the open platform strategy. That's what I'm talking about. The postmodern EHR, where the application is taken away from the data layer. The data layer should be standardized. It's easy. You can do it. And applications can live their own life on top. It's not more difficult than with mobile phones, right? It's not like if I want a new exercising app, I need to throw this phone away and buy a new phone that has that app. But that's what we sort of do, or trying to connect to another phone which has another app on it. Right? I mean, we're not doing that. We're more intelligent than that. So, to decision support, and this has to be brief because I've sort of spent all my time on the basic open platform discussion. You probably recognize this. This is a snippet of someone's genes. And that is one of the big new chapters that we as EHR providers are going into. Because if I took a sample of any one of you and took your and decipher it like this, I would get a text file about 3 gigabytes big of 4 letter combinations like this. So, okay, we can handle to analyze it, we can sort of get the letters down, and we can handle to store it. But so far in medicine, we don't know what most of this means. So what we need to do is that we need to store this, and we need to be able to come back to it, and we need to be able to run this against other information that we may have with you, on you. For instance, if a population at a hospital of breast cancer patients have some combination here that is never seen before, we are perhaps on the route to something that can help us identify these patients at risk. Or much more closer to realization, there's now an FDA list of more than 100 drugs of which we know the combination here. If you have that combination, you shouldn't take a certain drug. Normal drugs, like Plavix, drugs that we use a lot, where perhaps 30% of Norwegian population have little or no effect of the drug because they have a certain combination of these letters. So this is actually that's something that matters. Okay, how are we going to solve this technically? This way? That's a very rhetorical question, so you are supposed to say no. Because if we continue to think that, okay, what we need now is medication genetic system, and I'm going to build it from bottom up with a patient register, with all the logging that you need to be every little bell and whistle that you need to build a silo. Then we're just going to have one more silo, and it's going to cost a lot, and it's going to be difficult to integrate. If we go the postmodern way, we can achieve like what Bendik talks about, lightweight IT and heavyweight IT, the bimodality between having a stable platform and doing stuff pretty agile on the top. It's not just me saying this. McKinsey says it, Gartner says it. We're seeing more and more customers that says, you know, there need to be an open platform at the base of this. So make sure that when we start creating new projects here in Norway, be it the public sector creating something or private companies creating something, make sure that we do it openly. You remember the different shapes that were shifting in this from system to system. With a standardized open data layer, the data is there. The data is defined, and it's defined outside whoever delivered the data layer. That's the whole point. The data is owned by the customer. In Norway, it's National ICT. They own a library with all these data definition in it. And it can be expanded, and whoever delivers the platform doesn't have to know about it. That's OpenEHR. That's the whole idea in OpenEHR, but it could be other standards as well. And then let companies that create the application concentrate on the application layer, making cool applications that help clinicians and help patients on top of this common data layer. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tomas. Interesting. Are there any comments or questions to Tomas? A short one from myself. Is it really possible to build an information model bottom up as a community open source project worldwide within a reasonable time frame?
Well, I mean, yes, it is, and I mean, I don't see the alternative, because, I mean, the alternative is what we do today. We buy a product from a vendor who's already done this in his own way, based on his own opinions. We did that in DIPS until we went for OpenEHR. But I mean, the experience so far shows that it's possible. And I could also say that Genomics in England, for instance, which has this 100,000 genome project, they've decided that whatever they buy, they're going to buy an OpenEHR-based backend, because from their point of view, that's the only thing that makes sense when they're going to, in England, store 100,000 genomes and the phenotypes that goes with it to try to solve this genomics puzzle that I sort of introduced to you.
Thank you. Okay, then it's the next speaker, and Tomas is going to get a small gift from the conference on the way down.
Thank you.
Takk skal du ha. Og så bare bytter du mikrofonen til... Okay, now it's the next speaker. It's an honor to introduce Femi Ladega. He's a Global Healthcare Chief Technical Officer for CSC, where he has undertaken such jobs as integrating more than 30 million patient records onto a common platform for the NHS. Femi has been to Norway many times and recognizes the challenges we're facing, and maybe have some tips on how our healthcare data can become the new oil. Femi?
Thank you. It's great to be back here. You know, when I left London this morning, there was a kind of a, I would say, deep fog over Oslo, and the flight was kind of delayed. And, you know, that picture kind of gave me an insight into actually buttresses some of the things I'm going to be talking about today. And I'll take a slightly different approach, but complement what Tomas has just said. Because I believe that when you talk interoperability, at the heart of interoperability is actually access to the data. And everywhere we go today, I mean, what I have on the screen here, every strategic document you open is got to have, how do we address this disruption? How do we become more digital? How do we address this complexity? How do we do this? All these blah, blah things are in every single strategic document out there. But the reality is, think of where we are right now in healthcare. I think we're at an inflection point where so many things are kind of colliding together. One is you have the outside-in influence that is bringing rich data. You have an economic play. You also have a new digital mandate. As a patient, I want to be able to have my clinician share a lot of data with me. And that's why you're beginning to see some economic models around shared accountability with the patient, not just accountable care. But also what you also find really is, which I think is the key thing for us in our industry today, we're seeing new players that are bringing disruptive technologies to bear. This is just a snapshot of some things I picked up as summertime. The reality is the advent of digital technology is disrupting the way we handle care today. And why is that important? I think it's important for a few reasons, but I just kind of put my finger on two things. One is all these systems, whether they're about care coordination, whether about optimizing referrals, whether it's care at home, there's one thread that cuts through them, and that is all these systems have new information properties in them. You can easily connect with them, you can share data easily with them, and that's why there's going to be a proliferation of these systems. So the question then is, how do we, in a health system that is always evolving, and I use this terminology a lot, from wellness to wellness, the whole philosophy of healthcare is to keep me well, and when I suddenly fall ill, to accelerate my recovery process and keep me well. And that's why when you look around right now, some of the things that we're beginning to do is you now have signposting of information for me as an individual. My doctor can now prescribe some exercise, make sure you jump 5 times or run up the hill 5 times a day, or that kind of thing. That's all part of the fact that not only to keep me well, but also to advance the way and to deliver quality care. But that's why we now see, you see all those items on the right, on the left-hand side of this picture. You find we're looking for new ways to aggregate data. We're trying to figure out how on earth would we address IoT. We're looking at how do we incorporate all these new diagnostic services. Thomas talked about the 100,000 genome project in England. That's creating a whole new set of data sets. The question is, how do we bring all of that into the workflow of the physician? You probably find that throughout this, I'm not even going to talk about an EHR or an EMR, because I believe that in our industry today, we need to start to focus on, like what Tomas said, open data, where I can access the data irrespective of the underlying ontology, irrespective of the underlying technology, irrespective of how open that system may be or may not be. So I'm going to try and share a quick vision with you and what the journey could look like as well if we embark on the open data paradigm. I like this picture for 2 reasons. Because for us to deliver effective care, it's a confluence of an optimized patient journey, but one that is driven by insight around all of the data you capture around that person, but then delivered through a smart vehicle of engaging with the patient. When you look at the whole concept of population health management, my CMIO describes it this way: that population health management is about prospective identification of patients, right, and stratifying that folks, but also going for targeted intervention with closed-loop monitoring. I think that's a very wonderful description, but at the heart of it, Femi is different from Tomas. We may be in the same population pool, but the way you interact with me might be different from Tomas. Tomas is a clinician. I'm a clinician by association, because I'm a technical person. That's my stock in trade. But what you find really is the way we consume information is slightly different, But historically, we've pushed everybody down the same rabbit hole. So I believe that when we talk interoperability, 4 things need to be uppermost on our minds. One is data should drive insight. You know, we talk about improvement in care process. We talk about the ability to begin to pivot from volume-based healthcare delivery to fee-for-service. That requires insight into not only the population, but insight into how care is being delivered. The other point that for me really is data has to be ubiquitous. So it doesn't matter how you capture it, how you store it. It doesn't matter how open your system is. You need that capability to make the data completely available. And the third really is data has to be secure. I mean, many of us around here today, everywhere we turn, we find that there is a data breach somewhere, there is a data leak somewhere. And I think that's very hurtful as an industry. I mean, your medical record is worth more than your credit card details. But intuitively, when you lose your credit card, how quickly you call your bank that I've just lost my card, can you sort me out? But the key really is I believe that in this world of interoperability, there is no one-size-fits-all. We need to be able to protect data at a field level. We need to be able to protect at an organizational level. We need to be able to protect it with different veneer around it. And the last one there really is data has to be easy. You know, if you went to your doctor and you say, Doc, how am I doing today? Particularly if you're an individual that's had many interventions across the care network. A lot of things comes to mind. For that doctor to answer that question, or that physician, the data has to be current. In bulk of what we do today in answering those questions, they're based on extracting the data, transforming the data, and loading them into some wonderful big data platform, which I think is great. But the reality is, latency in healthcare is the difference between you dying and living. So the data has to be current. The other thing really is the data has to be consistent. You know, not only consistent, it has to be complete. How often you are the care coordinator of your care, not your physician, because you have a wider angle view to your own data than your physician. So the point I'm trying to make in all of this is very simple. Healthcare by default now, our operating model is a federated business model, which means my data resides in lots of systems in different ways, captured in different forms. I think for me, that's something that's an industry we need to come to realization with. But also within that same confusion, I think we can still push some standardized approach. But also we need to recognize that it's got to be an open ecosystem. But that creates a series of challenges. And one of the challenges, we need, from a security perspective, being able to derive value from openness. But we need to protect what matters, not what tends to happen today. We close the door behind everything. We need to be looking at how to put the data into enclaves or even hamlets where you can begin to share what is truly shareable. So, what is my approach, our approach as an organization, and also I think as an industry? I think we need to pivot to a point where we need to recognize that we need to build or enable an open data approach and then onboard or create the ecosystem around those data sets and then begin to connect both our legacy and our new applications. The reality is legacy systems aren't going to go away. And that tells me one thing, that we need to build the new with a new set of paradigm. And examples of them are here. But we need to tackle the legacy, because one of the things we tend to talk about in healthcare really is you can sweep the legacy out and replace it with new ones. Possibly rightly so in certain areas, but for wholesale healthcare transformation, old and new is like that hymn we all used to sing when we were in secondary. It's kind of an ancient and modern. The two things kind of go hand in hand. But it needs to be powered by an API-type economy. So I'll skip this. I'll just go to this. So why do I think this is important? If you think today you're building an application typically would have a UI, we have a middleware, we have a database. What we've done by stealth in healthcare really is we've created all these multiple icebergs. Every application, every vendor has built an iceberg, and that's what all of our procurement folks are buying. But I think there is a different approach to the way we look at data. I think by applying the context of open data, you can create a virtualized view of your data, which means you can easily discover the data, you can profile the data, you can classify the data. You can say this is a PI, this is an important piece of data that requires a different security profile. But most importantly, you can then share that data. And I think it's something akin to what Google does today with all of our documents, right? And I think that's where healthcare needs to pivot to, recognizing that you really cannot squash all of our data into a single data model. And that's what we've tried for years to do with analytics. We take the data, we transform it, and we load them into a new data model. What happens? We lose the provenance of the data. And it's hard. I mean, how many patient-centric or clinician-centric systems have been built on data warehouses that have no feedback into the original systems that generated the data? And that's the whole philosophy of open data. It takes away that problem. You know, I think it would be wrong of me to come to know we are not kind of put an oil approach or a crude oil approach to this. I think if you think of the philosophy of the way you get your crude oil and you take it through the refinery, and all of a sudden you have fuel on the floor of the station. And I think that's the same paradigm that we need to take, right? So this is how I'm challenging our own architecture within my company, that irrespective of the system, the data has to be made available, irrespective of the underlying technology, whether it's in primary care, acute care, in specialist system, name it. Because I think we need to move to a point where we begin to remove the whole vendor lock-in thing around data. Because if we're going to achieve the type of outcomes we need in healthcare, the data has to be open. But it needs to be respected with the right governance, with the right wrappers around it that makes the data easily available. And then what then happens? Now with access to that data, I can create composite APIs, I can create FHIR APIs, I can create all kinds of exploitation modes. And I think that's really important for us in healthcare because it shortens the time it takes to deliver value. So, for the technology-centric guys in the room, I think as a CTO, it'd be good to put a picture up there that shows how you can do it. But the point of this picture really is that you need to think of it in 3 layers. One is the layer that allows you to virtualize your data, a layer that allows you to deliver that virtualized data, but also create a veneer, i.e. it could be via an API gateway or whatever, that then begins to put some additional controls on that data. I think we need that 3-layered cake model in healthcare today. And I think as a vendor and as a supplier of solutions, I think we're going to see increasingly more demand like this on our products. And I think it would be a failure on our part not to build this concept into a solution. So I'm just going to end with this. I think this is my last but one slide. So if you think of it today, if you're in analytics, you probably spend 70% of your time looking for the data, trying to connect the data sets together, trying to curate the data. You know what happens? With open data, you actually reverse that trend because what you're getting is curated data. It's data that has been semantically linked with the right ontology, which means as a data scientist, I can spend time actually doing the real thinking. I can shorten the time to value. And that's why really for us, I am advocating this piece here. The reality is the payment models in healthcare will continue to change. And that is going to force new ways of working. The second thing really is, I think things like all of the teleservices, telecare, telemedicine, tele whatever you want to call it, they will push the boundaries in terms of healthcare. So remember that picture I showed you earlier? Digital technologies are here to stay, and they will really transform the way we work. The other thing is, every one of us have devices, whether they're Fitbits or what on us. Those things will continue to be pervasive within our world. And I think as consumers, the speed in which we want things will change and will continue to shorten the time. So I think as a supplier, I can never be fast enough for my consumers. There's no way my development pipeline can be fast enough. But wouldn't it be great if I provide open access to all of the data that my clients have bought from me? Then they can innovate around me. Others can innovate around me. And I think that's the type of ecosystem that we should be building. And what that means really is I can build a platform, I can connect the ecosystem, I can bring the legacy or my app, I can onboard my apps. And then that allows us to be moving to what I call healthcare 3.0, which means all of my data I can pull together in the systems of record and make it available in my system of insight. And which means all of the systems that organizations have, whether it's for care coordination, whether it's for regulatory compliance, whatever they may be, they can exploit all that data set in a very, very simple way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Femi. Any questions on the Healthcare 3.0 platform? So, how far have you come in CC establishing this ecosystem?
So this framework I just described right now is at play right now in the UK, is at play in the US, and is also at play in Singapore as we speak. So the reality is not, we've gone from point of vision to actually implementing. So we run a care coordination solution right now in the UK, and that's all underpinned by open data.
Any more questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Come down here and get a small gift. And thank you. Next speakers are a shared presentation with Amanda Green from Cerner and Mikael Rinnetmäki from Sensotrend. Amanda is a regional executive for Cerner in the Nordics. She has been working with ICT in healthcare for more than 15 years. And Mikael is founder of Sensotrend and has 16 years experience in both software development and also diabetes, it said. So they're going to present how Cerner's open developer experience, code.cerner.com, is accelerating an open community of innovation, and Mikael will tell us how they integrate their diabetes app in Cerner's global EHR platform.
Thank you very much. Thank you both, my co-presenters here. A very good warm-up, I think, and by way of introduction to what we're going to talk about today. We're very much focused on a vision of open platforms, which seemingly is shared. Oops, I don't want to lose that bit. So really what we're looking at here are ways and means for us to accelerate healthcare innovation by enabling a broader community to amplify power of open platforms. And the very simple question about that is why? And I think this is a key point. There is no one company with a monopoly on good ideas. So if we do not open up our platforms, if we do not allow contribution, if we do not encourage the ecosystem, we very much get locked into the silos that Tomas has been telling us about and that Femi has been kind of trying to explode for us. So very much we're focused on very similar things. This is a quotation that I included in the synopsis for the discussion today. It's from our CEO. And you might think, as a company who has kind of made their name and largely their business centered on the electronic healthcare record, that effectively kind of dispelling that as the core basis for our business model is a fairly bold step. But our CEO basically tore up our business model. Back in 2015, he said, if our healthcare platforms of the future are not open, and by open we mean that they are fully available for independent developers to build apps and extensions on the platforms that we already have installed and are available today, then largely we are a dinosaur. So we have effectively already said, this is the way forward. The open way that we are going to carry on and the ecosystems that we are encouraging and we are building is based completely on developers, developer communities, working with and around existing platforms, but also our new platforms in a completely open way. We're talking very much, as Femi introduced, about APIs. We're talking about APIs which enable the development of apps in a far more flexible, agile, and quick way than we as one single supplier can ever possibly come up with. We are talking about apps which are focused both around our customers who are looking at leveraging the very best that they can out of the major investments that they've made in the EHR platforms that we provide. But we're also looking at citizens who have an ever-demanding need for more information, consumer-facing apps. And we want to build an ecosystem which allows us to spread the data that we have, make that openly available, and encourage and innovate across the broad ecosystem. Tomas has already introduced the idea of one of the ways to do that, and I totally understand the open data model too. So I'm at level 2 here in terms of the ways that we have our emerging standards which are enabling us, using FHIR, using SMART, to get hold of the data and to activate and enable that in a very open way. We're making those standards first and foremost of everything that we do and enabling the SME community and the ecosystems to develop around the openness. We've kind of formalized the experience a little, and Mikael will tell you a little about what he's been doing with us. But we have an open developer experience. You might say, that all sounds a bit kind of complicated, so on and so forth. It really isn't. It's a way of making sure that our interaction with the potential customers, SMEs, and others who wish to participate is as simple as possible. So we've taken 3 core principles. 1, access. It is really important that anybody who wants to access the data and access the APIs is allowed to do so. So that's free access for our customers, it's access for small companies, it's access for big companies. It's about making sure that there are no barriers or very low barriers to entry. So we make sure that we have provided an environment within the developer experience where you can get the documentation and you can get the development tools, very simply. It's about trust. It's about an open business model as well as open technology and open APIs. It's about building trust between us as a fairly big American multinational supplier and the kind of developer community that Mikael and his company represent. It's about building predictable policy, it's about building processes, it's about building transparent rules of engagement which are really easily understood. We do not want to bog down the development community with 400 pages of contracts that you have to sign in blood before you are allowed to access the APIs and work with the core data set, okay? So it's very much about building trust. And finally, it's about opportunity. We recognize as one of the leading EHR and healthcare IT platform vendors in the world that leveraging our install base for small companies actually gives them a significant opportunity. But we want to do that through a path which enables them to commercialize their innovations. And not just the SMEs, our customers actually, I took a few slides out of this presentation because I thought I would talk too long, which is, anyone who knows me knows that's the usual case. Our customers equally are looking at ways that they can develop, they can innovate. Typically, our customers are absolutely at the leading edge in terms of development, in terms of new ideas, in terms of great ideas. And we just wanted to put 3 core principles in place around this program, which enabled us and them and the SME community to truly collaborate through this ecosystem. You'll see some of the names of the people that we're working with here down on the, it must be on the bottom right-hand side, left-hand side of your slide. Very confusing. Some really interesting stuff, and if you can have a look at the stand there, we'll show you some of the work that we've been doing with the likes of Geisinger, with these guys from Visual DX. That's a visual decision support application that's now embedded within the Cerner framework. And you can come along also and have a look at what the Sensotrend guys have been doing. So there. Anybody else out there who in any way is interested, this is where you go, sign up, get access, have a play in the sandpit, see if you too can come up with something really exciting. It's all about getting there as quickly as possible. And I shall finish with this. I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Halamka at a conference in Denmark a couple of weeks ago. And I was really pleased that actually a guy who is there as sort of one of the leading lights, Geek Doctor, I don't know if any of you follow his blog, we're very excited in Cerner to be recognized as leading the way. We are really keen on, as I say, opening up this opportunity to as many of you and as many of the SMEs and our customers as possible. And Sensotrend will now tell us what they've been doing.
Can I get the clicker?
You can have the clicker.
Thank you. So I'm Mikael from Sensotrend, and we've built an automated diabetes diary. I'm a type 1 diabetic myself. It means that my body no longer produces the insulin hormone. Rather, I must inject it with this kind of an insulin pump. And if I don't get any insulin, I'll be in coma in 24 hours. I'll be dead in 2 days. And if I inject too much insulin, I might drop dead in just a few moments. To know how much insulin my body needs in any given situation, I must measure my blood glucose up to 10 times per day. I need to estimate the carbohydrates in everything I eat and drink. I need to pay attention to my physical exercise, activity, exercise, stress, changes in weight, and other parameters. And I need to learn from this data. Nowadays, many of these modern wellness trackers make collecting that data easy and even fun. But learning from it remains a challenge. So that's where Sensotrend helps. We integrate with over 80 different wellness apps, activity trackers, meal logging applications, and so on, and with over 40 different medical devices like glucometers and insulin pumps and continuous glucose measurement devices. We pull all that data together and we visualize it in a way that's meaningful for treatment of type 1 diabetes. And we facilitate sharing it with healthcare professionals and peers. Our main promise to our customers, our end users, the people with diabetes, is that they don't need to copy data manually from one place to another. Rather, we integrate with all of these apps and devices, and it's enough for them to once link their Fitbit account, for instance, to our service. After that, the data flows automatically. And of course, we want to offer the same experience also for the doctors and nurses, the healthcare professionals using our service. And for that, we need to integrate with the EHR system, their user interface. We did that in spring this year. We integrated with Cerner and 2 other EHR systems and a Finnish laboratory system, all using essentially one implementation, Smart on Fire. And about our experience, I would say that I can testify all of what the EHR vendors are now saying, that they want to open their APIs. They do see the possibilities of this app ecosystem, and they want to allow startups to come in. It is actually true, and all of these made it quite easy for us to integrate with their services, so that when a doctor is logged into their station, they've picked up information of a patient, then they can, with a single click of a button, start Sensotrend's visualization of the data of that patient. And that's really happening. And where we see is the major bottleneck right now is in the attitudes of the IT people in hospitals. So we need to actually be able to tell them, hey, this can actually be done, and it can be done in a standardized way quite fast. And what's really great about all of these EHR vendors is that they expose sandboxes freely in the internet. So we can start even by self-registration or sending a short email describing the app that we are building and what we want to do. And we can be on our way hacking our app with no support required from the EHR vendor or the IT system of a hospital. We can come up with our service and then be able to show it in a real environment to the hospital, saying, okay, here's how it works. And it could work on your workstation if you just make this happen. And that's really good for a company like ours. So we've had some difficulties in the past where we couldn't even get far in the negotiations when we first needed to contact the IT department and say, okay, can we get a sandbox environment so we could demonstrate this in practice? No, because then you need to sign all those 400 pages of documentation. And really having the possibility to display our app on a sandbox, hey, it works. It's opened us a really many good opportunities so far. That's it from me, Mikael from Sensotrend. I'm more than happy to share our experiences about integrating with these systems and explaining all about how our application works. Come to Cerner stand. It's somewhere
That
there,
way.
yeah, quite close. So I'll be there the rest of today and early tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A question for you. Anyone from the audience? Yes, back up there. I'll take it slowly so I don't break my leg.
Hello, my name is Richard and I work for the Southeastern Health Region as a consultant, privately hired in. My question is to the trusting of all the vendors that develop applications and apps when the amount of vendors multiplies hugely. How do we make sure that there aren't vendors not misusing the data on its way between the users, the end users, and the base systems? Have you seen on any kind of certification programs or so on? We have the same problem today with the larger vendors that we have, but they are fewer, and we have perhaps just imagined for our part that we have better control over them, but still, they are fewer.
It's a very interesting question, and yes, absolutely. When we first started the program, and I left a few slides out about the whole kind of the total program, but obviously moving from concept design implementation within the sandbox to actually a commercial model and some kind of certification is now very much a focus. We've had many hundreds of companies, many hundreds of customers who've kind of now started the development. And what we have to do is work out what does the commercial model, if there is a commercial model, what does the open source model look like around certification? Because you're right, the data that we are exposing is incredibly sensitive. We need to in some way make sure that it's not misused, but we also need to make sure that the clinicians who are recipient or the citizens who are recipient of information that's being shared are absolutely 100% certain that it's verified and validated. So there are other steps within the process around certification that need to be applied if we do go on further to take these to kind of open market or to commercialize arrangements in some way. And I agree with you. I mean, we've even looked at we don't want to stifle the innovation by saying everything has to go through some kind of, CE/FDA type, approval matrix, because clearly that will completely stifle the speed and the agility that we're trying to encourage. But equally, you cannot have 100,000 apps all kind of willy-nilly diving into the open data set. So I think that's the next part of the model for all of us in terms of the consideration of once you open the data and once you make the APIs available, what do you do to curate the best possible outcome, both as an SME, a customer, and ultimately as a citizen?
From my part, I see the new model actually decreasing that cost, because currently when we bring our application to a clinic, all of the cost of proving that, okay, this works, how it works, all the documentation, we need to do that for that clinic system. And right now, part of that cost can be done in the phase where we integrate with Cerner. And then Cerner said that, okay, this is the baseline where we have certified this application, and the clinics trust Cerner enough. Okay, we don't do that baseline certification again. Rather, these are the aspects that are really important for our organization. We just check those. So it will be cheaper for us, cheaper for the organization, and really good for Cerner as well.
Hi. It sounds like most people agree that open systems are a good idea. But I wonder what you think about open source systems. Is there a place for open source systems to take the spot that Cerner and Epic and DIPS and all the other vendors have now?
We use lots. I mean, it's interesting because everybody kind of, I think, confuses the fact that we are a commercial company with the fact that clearly that's some sort of antithesis and it's the opposite end of the open source spectrum. You'd probably be quite surprised. We use lots of open source within the solutions we have today. Within our population health platform, lots of open source elements. And we've also contributed many millions of lines of code, for example, to the Direct project in the US, which is the open email project. So I don't think being a commercial supplier completely means that you have nothing to do and nothing to be gained from open source. In fact, the very opposite. I think, again, it's part of an ecosystem. It's a collaboration. There are very good times and there are good models for the use of open source. I think part of the issue that we would have if the platform, so the core platform, became open source would be one of maintenance, support, validation, keeping up to date with regulatory, keeping up to date with legislative, CE marking, if that was applicable, so on and so forth. That is a really, really tough job which should not be underestimated. So I think there is very definitely a role for open source. There is also very definitely a role for commercial operations who are willing to work within a very open ecosystem environment.
I would add to that many parts of the Smart on Fire standard that we integrate with are implemented in open source. So many of the tools, almost all of the tools that we use as part of our product are done in open source. All the spec itself is made in quite an open manner, and the tools that you can get to start even before approaching Cerner, the stuff that you can have your own EHR on your own PC implemented by Smart on Fire, that's fully open source. You're free to contribute. And I think there's no avoiding open source. It is required for all these EHR vendors. They need to participate in that, and I think that's a good aspect as well.
Any one of your other vendors want to comment on that?
I think the concept of open source for me is here to stay. I think we're going to see a lot more solutions built on open source. And like Amanda said, every one of us really have open source components within our solution. But I do think, though, the point that Amanda was making for me is really important, because when you build solutions on open source that is based on community, I think it's great. But when it gets to you exploiting all of the regulatory controls that you need to have in, all of the real support infrastructure behind it, I think that's why what we're seeing with the likes of Cassandra, with the likes of Apache NiFi, all these technologies are great, but you need appropriate support structures around them that ensures what's happening is sustainable. So I think open source is going to be here for a long time. I mean, all of our integration within CSC is wall-to-wall open source. So, but I think that's the world we live in right now.
Yeah, same obviously goes for DIPS. It's sort of a paradigm shift that every forward-looking vendor is part of these days. And I mean, some people may be surprised by that, but I mean, it's enough to look around you. Obviously, it has to be like that if you don't want to create everything from the bottom yourself. I also had a question, if you don't mind. Thank you both for a fantastic presentation, and it's really good as a small-time vendor. We are about 250 people, and Cerner, you're a lot bigger than that, to see that we still share some basic ideas and the understanding that one company cannot solve everything alone. And I like the fact that you brought Mikael to show that. It's fantastic. One thing when we are talking about open source is the resources. I mean, you are based on Fire. We use Fire and OpenEHR, but the bottleneck there, as Eirik was discussing or asking me, is that you need clinicians, you need people that know the domain to create enough of these resources. And there has been one attempt, which was quite successful, for a collaboration between OpenEHR and HL7 on critical information, which is one model, where one found that one could actually do the modeling once and apply them both as Fire resources and as OpenEHR archetypes, and whichever other formalism you would want to use. So I would sort of extend an invitation to you as a large company with a lot of resources to say, can we have more of that kind of cooperation, not just between, within our environment, but also between the HL7 and the OpenEHR communities? So,
yes. I would say that, wouldn't I? One of the things that we've been working on actually is so the archetype models that we have been spending most time with recently are actually the clinical element models that have been curated by Dr. Stan Huff at Intermountain for the last 20 odd years. So if you have seen any of those, you will know in terms of the depth and the granularity of that data model. We've been transforming to those. So what we've been doing is converting those to Fire, but also putting that as the basis for our open model. So we are going to continue to do a lot of that work, but I think that there is considerable overlap, and I'm with you. I mean, everybody's inventing a new wheel. We should collaborate, particularly through our involvement. We're very heavily engaged with HL7, Project Argonaut, et cetera, in the US. So I think there is an awful lot to be gained by working together in that way.
Hello. My question is to the doctor from Sensotrend. You mentioned that you integrate with 70 to 80 different data sources, different vendors, and I'm willing to bet all proprietary in some way or form. So the way I look at this, and I'm a biomedical engineer, you've built 70 interface brokers, and you are actually an interface broker to Cerner, and then Cerner also can go back through you to your application. So you're just kind of along a continuum of data collection and the ability to visualize it in however model you wish to present that. How did you go about getting that integration with those 70 to 80 different data sources? Because I know they're not using open data standards. Is that true?
Actually not. So we need to separate between the wellness apps and the medical devices. So almost all of these wellness trackers do have open APIs, well-defined, RESTful interfaces with JSON content, and that's pretty straightforward to integrate with all of them, and there's even less hassle than with the medical side. So you just take those components, standard ways of authenticating and so on. And we didn't even build 80 different interfaces. Rather, they are aggregators that we use. There's Validic in US.
Okay.
There's
So you're an
Velma.
integrator.
No,
what about
we
the
are not
actual
the
data?
aggregator. Rather, we use aggregators that do that for us. So we've got 4 or 5 different APIs that we integrate with. So the chain goes even further, but there is a certain profession for certain companies that then keep the integrations to all these different wellness trackers up to date and maintain those for us. And that's a really good business for them and for us.
Is that data, though, I'm going to my question.
Yep.
Is that data item in a standardized format when you have it? And what I mean by that is, could it be low ink IEEE 11073? Is it HL7 PhD? Because to get to, I think, his model of healthcare 3.0, he talked about clinical ontology. That's really the way you're going to open this up, to me, as I understand it. Am I understanding you correctly? So to really make it a data-driven model, you've got to at least agree upon how the data is going to be standardized. Does your product do that? No. Okay. All right.
So
I don't mean to knock you down here. I just want to understand better.
That's a very good question, and I need to emphasize that. Okay, this is for treatment of type 1 diabetes, and currently without any apps, all the decisions or the discussion is based on what I tell my doctor. So whatever I can collect with an activity bracelet, for instance, about my activity, it's good information, and it's never 100% correct, but it gives really good guidelines, okay, whether I'm active compared to the other population of type 1s that my doctor treats. So even if it's 15% off to either direction, it doesn't really matter. The accuracy is not a big deal in this use case. And that's for the wellness devices. And then I was saying that for the medical devices, it is a bit different. And on that side, we've had to make much more direct integrations with these devices and actually have good conversation with the device manufacturers there it's kind of easier on the regulation side because those are all regulated and there are pretty well established standards of how that data is represented. So, valid points.
Any more questions? I think we're running out of time. Well, I was at the World of Health IT conference in 2007. The topic for that conference was interoperability. So now we are here, 9 years later. It's starting to move. Sandbox, open interfaces, that's good. Still a lot of challenges, but looking better. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. A big applause for all the speakers, and get down there and get your gifts also. Thank you.